Hey everybody, it's Craig Syracuse. Welcome to a new episode of Walk in Faith. Yes, we are in the Opera House, but today's exciting. I'm sitting down with my friend Judge Patricia DiMango, and it's exciting because Monsignor Jamie doesn't like to share his contacts, but I was able to coordinate this interview. I want to thank you so much. Thank you.
I am thrilled to be here, and I'm thrilled that the Monsignor actually gave up my number to you.
It took a while, but the reason why we're here is because, everyone knows her from the hit show Hot Bench, which is #2, right?
#2 judge show in the country. Judge Judy's still #1.
Amazing. Well, the reason why we're sitting here is because you have this new book, and I don't know how you find the time. It's From the Kitchen to the Courtroom. And it really took me back to when I grew up in Bensonhurst, and you also grew up in Bensonhurst / Dyke, and it was very different back then. But if you could tell us a little bit about what it was like growing up in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, or Dyke.
As you know, it's a very tight, warm, ethnically homogeneous community, basically. We all centered around going to our churches, going back home, and eating and sharing dinner with the families. And Sunday was the most important day to us because it was on Sunday that we all gathered at my grandmother's home, all my first cousins, and there were 13 of us, wow. My aunts and uncles, and my parents, of course, my grandparents, and we would go right after Mass. Everyone would meet there. We'd go to our respective parishes, go there, and have antipasta and have homemade wine and all the things, the focaccia and all that my grandmother made herself. And we'd spend time with one another, and then we'd all go home and eat our Italian dinners.
Wow. And I remember Monsignor Jamie told a story too, which you have in your book, very similar, how your grandmother would make the pasta and then put it on the bed and then go to church and they'd come back. How important was, especially Sunday meals, to your grandma, Josephine?
I think that she worked the whole week for Sunday meal, because that was when all of her children and all of her grandchildren could be under one roof. But you know what you're saying about putting the pasta on the sheet on the bed? I thought we were the only family that did that. But as you tell stories to people, you realize everything that they did must have been something they did in Italy. They came here from Italy. My mother was born in Italy. Her brothers and sisters were. So all of these traditions, they brought here from their country. And when you talk to other people, I'm talking to you now, we did the same thing. We all did the same thing. It was amazing. They taught you love of family, love of food, and of course, as the Monsignor would say, food, faith, and love.
Yeah.
Food, faith, and family. And that's really what you learned. And things are different today because I remember the first time a family member moved outside this 2-block radius where we all lived. Like my grandmother was the hub. She lived here with my grandfather, and her children kind of lived a block or so away. But I remember when my Uncle Frank moved from here to here.
Oh my God.
Oh, it was like he was ostracizing the family. He was like, what are they doing? Why'd they go 5 blocks away?
That's amazing.
Grandma can't walk there, it's too far.
But when I was a kid, I used to like to make salad. That was my thing, to cut and eat the olives. At what age were you introduced to cooking, and what was your sort of job within the kitchen?
Well, you know what? The book, From the Kitchen to the Courtroom, when we were growing up, my father had been in school, and so we lived. My grandmother had a 4-room apartment, 2 bedrooms, a big kitchen area, and a living room. And my mother, my father, and myself, when I was an infant, I grew up in that room until I was 3 years old, and my sister was, kind of born a little bit before that, and we couldn't stay there anymore. But my high chair was in that kitchen. That's where it was. There was nowhere else to be. So she would make the dough for the pasta or for the pizza, whatever, and they would put it on the high chair. That was how I grew up, seeing my mother, my grandmother, my aunts cooking. So the kids had Play-Doh, I had pasta dough.
What life lessons did you learn from being in the kitchen that you still use today, in the kitchen, but also within the courtroom?
You learn to understand people. You learn to watch people, to read them, to read their expressions. You learn about getting along with one another. You learn that just because you're angry doesn't mean that you're not going to speak in 10 minutes. You learn about loving and connecting, and that's what we did. And we learned, and the thing is, when you're with, and for those people who have children and all, if you're sitting at a dinner table with your kids, You know if they're hanging out with bad people. You know if they're not eating, maybe something is wrong. Maybe they don't feel well. Maybe they're involved in drugs. Maybe they're lovesick. You know, you learn a lot about sitting at a kitchen table or a dining room table with people. And you have conversations with people in a depth and with a warmth that you would never have in just any other social gathering. And then, of course, for my job, you know, that's how I learn. I look at people, I study people, because I have to make snap decisions about what they're about.
Interesting. You're right. Because even as a kid, you learn your place in the family. You learn to listen, because we would sit at the kids' table, and then over time, when you matured, you would move on to the larger table.
It's a commercial that I just saw for the first time a couple of nights ago. It's a family eating dinner, and then there's a kids' table, and the older boy is like now a little bit out of place at the table, and his father goes like this with his head.
I saw that.
You saw that, right? And he
it's
goes,
like the
"Come and take
initiation."
take your place at the adult table."
Yep, you're
And
right. That's
he
one
knew.
thing I constantly remind myself. Even when I go to meetings, know your place.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's in the Gospels, and it's like, know your place. Like, don't try to outshine or don't try to move ahead. Like, you just know your place. And as a kid, I remember my place. And then sooner or later, I was able to do certain things within the kitchen, or I had more responsibility. And what's interesting in the book is the era. Like, your grandmother, she taught you how to cook. She taught you how to make wine with Uncle Dominic. And you learned that, how to make a home. But at the same time, she instilled school. Like, go to school, go to college, which wasn't, I want to say, wasn't that popular
It was
back
not.
then.
You know, you can say it, because the
Yeah.
reality was not every home, especially for immigrant Italian families, just like any other immigrant family that comes here, they're just trying to keep their head above water. You know, my grandparents were working, you know, not taking from anyone, just working hard to put food on the table. If you had food on the table, you were rich. Right? You were rich. You knew it. Everybody was there. Nobody was hungry. So you learned that that's what it was all about.
So what was your motivation? I know your dad was a dentist, right?
My father, as he would say, he was an oral surgeon.
Oral surgeon.
Yeah,
I know, it's all right. And your mother made a mark. I mean, in the community and history, you also made history. But what was the motivation? Because, like you said, maybe your family and friends, it wasn't popular at the time. So what did you lean on? What was your motivation to continue?
Well, we knew we had to go to college. And like you were saying earlier, education trumped anything. You know, we had to learn the basics, cooking, sewing, knitting, and all of that. I mean, believe me, I wouldn't make you a sweater. Take my word for it. But, you know, I could cook you a meal. But even though I learned those things, education was stressed. Education was the only way that we really knew that we were going to move up and move forward in life. And my grandmother, for whatever her language barriers were and all, she knew that, and she pushed my mother, and my mother went to college. My father, as you said, was a professional, and my mother, once she married, she put the education aside, as a lot of women do, and she became involved in the community. She became involved in the school system. She was the local school board. She was there from the inception. And she did this throughout her career. She took an interest in immigrant women. She put forward their cause to move into society, to get jobs, to have childcare so that they could do it. So she was an icon within the Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, Bensonhurst, Dyker Heights community. Everyone recognizes that the ticket out of anywhere, the ticket up and out, is education.
Okay.
And it was stressed in our lives. The church stresses it still. It's extremely important.
And you spoke beautifully at, I think it was a recent function, about the Catholic education, the importance of it. And you did make history. I mean, you were on Monsignor Jamie's show, but you spoke about just how many, episodes you shoot in the schedule, and you wrote the book. But now, out of all the episodes you've done, is there something that one of the cases that you still think about, reflect on, that you still you think about today?
You know, there's more than one case that you think about, and generally those are cases where someone is taking advantage of or hurting someone who's vulnerable. I always feel like, I want to be there for the underdog. It's different, you go and you hire a contractor to paint your bathroom, he paints the floor instead of the bathroom, you sue him, you get your money back, kind of. There's nothing personal, there's nothing painful in that. But when I get a case where there's pain, when someone's in pain and someone is abusing that and taking advantage of that pain that angers me more than anything. But I try to let them go, those cases. I try to let it go.
But how do you disconnect from that? Is cooking a way of disconnecting? You go home and you make pasta? Is that what you do to disconnect?
It's interesting because a lot of women don't cook, which always surprises me, and which is part of why I've written the book too, to say, hey, look, anybody could do this. If I could do it, you could do it. You know, I was always brought up to be, you have to be productive. You have to be productive. So cooking became a way for me to feel like I was being productive, and yet I was kind of able to space out.
So what does it do for you, like personally, mentally, spiritually, when you cook? Because it's got to have some sort of connection, right? Emotional.
It does. It's all of that. It's giving back. It's giving from your heart. It's sitting down with friends and family and exchanging beliefs, ideas, and just warming up to one another. So it really combines all of that. You can't be in that room, in that kitchen, and have dinner with us without feeling that way.
And writing this book, I mean, you wrote this during the pandemic.
I did.
And we weren't able to see family, friends, or anyone. And to sit down and sort of rehash those memories, those personal stories, that must have really been difficult for you at times, because you're reliving those memories and you're not able to see your family and your parents passed. What was that like for you emotionally?
It was very difficult. There's a couple of little excerpts in there that I know just really touched me and brought me to tears. And sometimes I'd call my sister and my cousin Linda, who I dedicated the book to, and I'd say, I'm tired of eating pasta. I never thought I'd say that. Could you make this dish and make sure you follow the recipe? Because the truth is, Craig, we would just throw stuff in the pot and the pan. We didn't measure. So when I had to decide how much oil I was putting in, it was a process. It was, I don't think I made it right this time. Let me do it again. So, you know, you want people to also put their heart and their faith into it and just do what they feel about cooking.
And what story sort of touches you the most?
Walking from church with my sister and my cousin to my grandmother's house, when we would, every once in a while, we'd say, oh my God, we can smell the gravy out on the street.
Wow.
We could smell it because they all had these, you know, attached homes. There were multiple family buildings, you know, 3 or 4, not huge buildings. And there would always be just a small opening in the window where you could actually peer in and see. And you'd always see the Italian mother or grandmother. Did you ever see those big metal pots that they look like somebody went through the war with them? And they're stirring it and they have an apron on, and the aroma would just permeate onto the street. And we'd walk there, and every once in a while, if I'm cooking something and I get that, it really, you're bringing me to it really brings me back to those days. And I miss them very much. And they say that the olfactory sense, the sense of smell, is one of the strongest senses to bring you into a memory. And interestingly, when I went to Italy for the first time and I got off the plane and I stepped out and I looked at the mountains and the hillside, I said, oh my God, this is who I am. This is a piece of me that I couldn't put together that wasn't quite there for me. And now I know this is from whence I've come. This is who I am. My grandparents came here on a boat, both sides, nobody speaking English, reading or writing English, kids in tow, and came here. And that was the piece of me that was missing, knowing where I had come from.
Wow, that's beautiful. Well, we're going to take a quick break, because we're going to have Msgr Jamie, who's going to join us, and we have a few sort of the do's, the don'ts, and some of the common mistakes and questions. So we'll be right back with Msgr Jamie Gigantiello. Hey guys, welcome back. We're sitting down, Msgr Jamie and Judge Patricia DiMango. Thank you so much for sitting down with me. The holidays are coming, and there's always these do's, these don'ts, my wife said they're not do's and don'ts, but the arguments that happen over the table, and you spoke about a lot of them in your book. So the first thing is, we're gonna go through this list. What is stiza?
What is a stiza?
It was dialect. My grandmother would say, when I would say, what do you put in this? She'd say, una panda de farina, una stizza di sale, a little bit of salt. Stizza. See, and I used to say, what's a stizza? Do we have a stizza? Do we own a stizza? What do you do with it?
Dialects in Italian, you'll never know. Forget about it.
Yeah, I was looking in the drawer. I'm like, I don't think I own a stiza, but all right. So is it sauce or gravy? What's the difference?
Technically, anything that comes from meat or a bone is gravy. A sauce comes from ingredients that are mixed together. That's the technical difference.
I just take the view that sauce is the broad category, what you're going to put on your any of your food, whether it's on your beef, on your chicken, on your turkey, on your macaroni, on your potato, it's sauce. But if you put meat in it, like the Msgr said, if you put meat in it or meat stock in some way, it actually turns the tomato sauce into a darker color and it becomes gravy. It's meat gravy. I don't know why people make fun of the Italians. That's not gravy, it's only with meat. No, there is meat in here and it is darker.
Let me ask you now, do you add grated cheese to the meal or taste it first and then add it, or no grated cheese at all?
I drown my food in grated cheese.
There's certain foods that you need grated cheese on. It's like having French fries without ketchup. Some people like a little bit more than others, and they'll do it.
I think you sprinkle when you're putting it in a serving bowl, you're going to sprinkle some on top. You're not going to overdo it because you just want to give it a moderate taste. But then you go around with the bowl and you say, anybody want more cheese? And you'll always see me go, yeah, just keep putting it on.
And was it in Italy? You said there's somewhere you went when you asked for it.
Yes. When
they
I was in
wouldn't give it to you.
Puglia, when I was in Italy, I ordered a fish sauce, like a pasta with pescatore or something with fish. And I said, could I get cheese? They said, no. I said, I thought they were kidding. I said, but I'd like it. No, we won't bring it. We won't bring it.
Wow. All right, so how about this? Pasta or macaroni, what's the difference?
Pasta's fresh usually. And macaroni is, I don't know, is it Neapolitan?
Pasta covers all the different forms of pasta. Macaroni was one form. You know, all the different shapes and sizes, they have different names to them. One of the shapes was macaroni. So when it came here, right away, you know, you started to use the term macaroni as a broad sense.
I love lasagna, and you mentioned in the book too. Do you buy it? Do you only eat it out, or do you buy the boxed
All three.
lasagna? You buy the boxed lasagna?
I buy box. I buy fresh pasta
Really?
sheets.
Was it Stouffer stuff? Is that
Oh, no,
the-
that's what you mean by box?
It's already
No.
prepared.
Yeah.
No.
It's like
No.
eating ragu.
No. Oh,
Actually, I don't.
yeah, right.
There's an easy one. Sundays, do you eat dinner at 2 or 5 or 6 p.m.?
Oh, that's very easy. 2 o'clock.
2 o'clock.
2 o'clock.
Sunday was an afternoon dinner.
It was very reminiscent of being in Italy. I mean, I think what they did on Sunday between going to church, coming home, meeting family, and having extended family at the table, I think was very much reminiscent of what they did back in Italy. And so if you go to Europe, they eat their big meal in the middle of the day.
Every day.
Right. But we did it on Sundays. It was because everybody was home. Your grandparents weren't working, your parents weren't working, and you could eat at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, just like they did in the old country.
And supper was something light. That's why on
Exactly,
Sunday
yeah.
you would have dinner at 2 o'clock, and you'd be done at 4. In Italy, they had supper at night. So Sunday night, we go get the macaroni out,
And you
heat
reheat
up,
it.
you know, make a meatball sandwich
Exactly,
or something
yeah.
like that.
And how often do you stir the sauce?
Oh, you can never stir sauce too much. You just stir it. Every time you walk past the pot, basically, you go look at it, you give it a stir.
And then you taste a little bit.
Did you use fresh tomatoes or canned?
We always use canned.
We
Canned?
used to can, but my grandmother at the end of the summer would jar her own tomato sauce. So if you went, they would get bushels, you know, because you can use them bruised, the tomatoes, and you would go and they would have all the jars with this, you know, the vacuum seal tops and all, and they'd be in the pot. When what are you doing? We'd ask, what are you doing? You know, grandma's making her own sauce, and they would jar it, and then they'd use it throughout the year. But we, as growing up, my mother was buying the sauce unless we got it from grandma.
What about the wine? Did you get the wine from Dominic, or did you?
My Uncle Dominic was on my father's side, my grandma. So on both sides, they made wine in the basement, and they would go down there, and they'd have the barrels, and the rooms were dark and cold.
What was the room called? We
but-
called it my grandmother-in-law, grandmother, Gandine,
Candine,
right?
Or
The Gandine.
yeah, but
I
the-
call it the Gondolini.
Chandine.
Families in general, right? They don't really sit down for dinner. But from what I noticed during the pandemic, for me too, I was home all the time. Sat down with my son and my wife, and we enjoyed family dinner, and that's sort of lost in society. And I think people did get that sort of realization of how important it is. And, you know, you talk about the good old days, her black and white memories, and when you were younger, and it was the good old days. Do you think that the way it is now, do you think we'll ever go back to the days with Grandma Josephine or Uncle Dominic and sitting down as a family and just being present?
I don't think we'll go back completely, but I think the pandemic helped us to put our priorities in order. We were forced to be together with immediate family, not having, 100 people there and, being busy every day, but the importance of sitting down every day with family and eating and sharing. It made us think. So I think people will be more, in tune to do that a little bit more. But I don't think we'll ever go back to what it was then.
We can't, because our lives are just structured differently these days. We don't live next to one another anymore. I mean, I don't think I can name 3 relatives that live within walking distance. I can't name 1 relative that lives within walking distance of my home. So we don't have it. It's not that easy and convenient for us in that way. But what like Monsignor is saying, but COVID was a reminder of how important this was. And I think we've now made an effort through different means, through Zoom calls, through other means, to try to now connect again to one another in a way that I had Easter dinner during COVID online. I was alone in my home. I set up my table just for myself, and my sister was home. My niece was at her house. The in-laws were, and we had Easter dinner. And it was just, it was amazing.
Where can people find your book or connect with you beyond Hot Bench, which you're on TV every day? Monsignor's on once in a while, but where can people connect with you?
Well, we do have a Facebook and all of these internet means of connecting with one another. The book can be purchased either through Amazon or through Barnes & Noble websites.
Honestly, fantastic book. There
Thank
are
you.
a couple of recipes in there. I'm going to
And one of them isn't one of my recipes in there.
No, that was edited
See,
out.
everybody wants credit for
The spaghetti
the recipe.
and linguine and clams. Isn't that
No.
my recipe?
No, that's my recipe. But
Did
you
you
went
invent
clamming.
that?
He went clam. He was one of the people in the group that went clamming when we got all these clams from the Shinnecock Bay.
Well, guys, listen, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Judge DiMango.
Thank you for
Monsignor
having me.
Jamie.
And thank you for all that you do.
I appreciate
Really,
that.
this is amazing. It's amazing what you do.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's because of Monsignor Jamie, because of God, because of my foundation that I'm able to do this. So I appreciate that very much. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Walk in Faith. Always remember, you have the ability to inspire and evangelize through your words and actions. God bless you.